Thanks for coming, everybody, and welcome to our fourth instalment of our Nature Positive webinar series. I'm Andrea Montgomery, the current chair of the Friends of the Barwon Group. The Friends of the Barwon is a catchment-wide community group working to protect and restore the waterways in the Barwon system. We work, live and care for the lands, waters and seas of the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation and the Gulidjan and Gadabudal people of the Maar Nation, and we acknowledge them as traditional custodians of these intertwined ecosystems. With our population steadily growing and our water resources depleting, today's webinar is focused on what's happening in the recycled water world. How can we increase the use of recycled water and integrate it into our everyday lives? We're lucky enough to have three extremely knowledgeable presenters today in Erin Toner, who has worked on the New South Wales Government's recently released Recycled Water Roadmap, and Emma James from Sydney Water, who has worked on an innovative water recycling project at Picton. We've also got Peter Morgan, who will outline the innovative integrated water management projects which are happening a bit closer to home at Barwon Water. Just go over to the housekeeping side. We've got a couple of things that we just need to say before we get started and to ensure the webinar runs smoothly. Please keep your microphones muted and your camera off throughout the presentation. We have got this presentation being recorded, so you'll be able to rewatch it and share it at a later date, but also it helps to keep your cameras off for that reason. If you have any questions or comments throughout the presentations, please use the chat function to note these, and we'll address all the questions at the end of the presentations when the presenters are finished. We'd also love it if you could complete the feedback survey, which will be at the end of today's presentation. There's a QR code that you can use to scan and get into that survey. I'll now hand over to Trent Griffiths, who is the Strategy and Partnerships Manager at the Corangamite CMA. Trent is a long-time supporter of the Friends of the Barwon and is going to introduce our speakers and act as the moderator for today's webinar. So thanks, Trent. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I am really excited to have the job today of I guess facilitating mostly facilitating the Q&A session at the end of this. I'm sure all of our amazing community who have dialed in have lots of questions that they want to put to the panel, so please keep them coming throughout the presentations in the chat function. It'll be my job to harvest all of those from the chat and sort through them and direct them to our three speakers when the time comes at the end of all their presentations. Yeah, we will cover all of that at the end. If we don't get to covering your question live in the Q&A part of the session, we'll endeavour to get back to people with a written response. Depends how many questions come flooding in. So as Andrea said, I'm at Corangamite Catchment Management Authority. I'm also a friend of the Barwon. I would very strongly support everyone here. If you aren't a friend of the Barwon, please join. The group do amazing work. Really proud to work with them. And I'm very, very delighted to introduce our first speaker, Erin Toner. So Erin is a Principal Water Strategy Officer with the New South Wales Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, also known as DQ, not to be confused with the federal DQ. It's the New South Wales chapter, I guess. Erin has worked in urban water planning for over 10 years and has played a really key role in the government's work on the Lower Hunter Water Security Plan and the Greater Sydney Water Strategy. But of course, also on the Recycled Water Roadmap. So that's what Erin's going to be focusing on today. It's fantastic. If you haven't checked it out before this presentation, strongly recommend going and checking out that Recycled Water Roadmap online. And yeah, without further ado, my absolute pleasure to introduce Erin.
Thank you very much. So yes, as Trent said, I represent the New South Wales Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water, and we have recently released this Recycled Water Roadmap just a few short months ago. So I'm really happy to start to promote it a little bit more broadly and particularly outside of New South Wales, which we don't often get the opportunity to do. The Recycled Water Roadmap is, everyone see that screen okay? So the Recycled Water Roadmap really sets out our vision for the future of water recycling in New South Wales. It lays out the groundwork for how we want to provide more secure and resilient water supplies well into the future. And it sets out 3 specific elements as part of our vision. So one being that utilities consider recycled water alongside other supply and demand options, that there's an overall increase in the delivery of recycled water solutions in the future, and that communities understand water recycling options and that they're engaging with utilities specifically on purified recycled water for drinking, which will be a key point in my presentation today. So the roadmap has got 14 actions in it, and I'll touch on a few of the ones today that I thought would probably be of most interest. And those actions span across 5 key priority areas. The actions that we've put in this roadmap were really driven by a discussion across the water sector on what the barriers were to water recycling and what utilities and councils and kind of peak bodies felt were the issues that they were struggling with in delivering more recycled water. So I'll touch on just a few of the priorities and actions. I didn't want to go kind of deep dive into everything because it does get quite technical, but I think some of them will be of interest. So our first priority is around statewide policy and planning frameworks that support coordinated planning for recycled water. So these are really the government policy and planning levers that we can pull to drive the delivery of recycled water solutions. What we heard in our engagement is that there are challenges in delivering recycled water, in particular if they haven't been really well planned from the onset and if they're not part of a broader strategic planning solution. So ultimately, we need to better consider water when we develop our place-based strategies, and we need a lot more coordination across all of the agencies that are involved in the water planning process in order to create better and more coordinated solutions that have recycled water embedded in them. One of the things that we're doing is looking at the role of BASICS, and BASICS is the New South Wales planning requirement for energy and water. And we're looking at that alongside some sustainable building planning policies as well. So those are those policy levers that give us an opportunity to look at on a site-by-site basis. So say, for example, using rainwater tanks on site versus a precinct scale solution where maybe you're harvesting stormwater for local scale irrigation. So what can we do at that kind of local and precinct level to drive those recycled water solutions? Under priority 2, this is about providing tools and resources. So we heard in our engagement that utilities, particularly small utilities, find it challenging to really evaluate and assess the merits of recycled water options against other supply options. And that there's a need, particularly in the economic space, for them to get a little bit more support. So what we're doing is we're developing up a guideline to help support cost-benefit analysis. And this will align with our New South Wales Treasury guidelines around cost and benefit analysis. So this will help utilities be able to truly quantify the things that are often difficult to quantify in a recycled water space. So things like the benefits that come from additional urban greening or social amenity, the avoided wastewater costs that can come from reusing water instead of releasing it, and waterway health improvements that can come from reintroducing water back into the landscape and reducing the draw on drinking water sources. Our third priority is around providing clear regulatory and approvals processes for recycled water. And really setting up the water group within the department as the key coordination agency. So our intent is that this will provide a much more consolidated approach and bring together the multitude of agencies in the New South Wales government that work in the recycled water space. I'm not sure if it's quite the same where you are, but for us, there are quite a number of players. So there's roles for New South Wales Health, there's roles for planning, there's the water department, there's the EPA in terms of river health and discharge releases. There's also, in some cases, the Food Authority when recycled water might be used for different forms of production. So it's quite complicated, and this is a way for us to provide a coordinated service, as well as what we're calling our concierge, and this is our concierge mascot. So we've now developed the recycled water concierge, and what that is kind of a one-stop shop for utilities, developers, and councils to come and get advice and information that they need to deliver recycled water projects. So it's about us providing information and resources, raising awareness about recycled water and how it can be part of the solution, but also allowing us to give targeted advice around specific applicable guidelines, codes, regulatory instruments, the different challenges in navigating the regulatory framework, and allowing us to do that on a very personalized basis. Priority 4 is about building up capacity and capability across the whole sector to deliver innovative solutions. This is about educational resources. It's about working together to look and understand the technical issues that are coming up in the recycled water space and finding solutions together. It's also about supporting utilities in their strategic planning processes and allowing them the tools that they need to understand and kind of work through where a recycled option might be a good solution for them. And being able to make sure if they identify a good recycled water option in their strategic planning stage, that they actually have the skills and capability to deliver that on the ground. Priority 5 is our last priority, and it's the one that I work the most closely on. So this is about taking steps now so that something called purified recycled water is an option for our future drinking water supply. Now, I wasn't sure how familiar people were with the concept of purified recycled water, and if it's the same sort of language that's used in Victoria. But it's quite common here that we've been trying to integrate the use of that term. And this is water that is coming, so the original source of this water is water that's coming from homes, businesses, and industry. So it's coming from kitchens, showers, toilets, and washing machines. That water is being delivered to a wastewater treatment plant where it's treated by multiple processes to produce a form of recycled water. So that recycled water would then we'd have a discharge component that would be released to rivers and oceans, but we're actually taking a portion of that water and we're moving it to a purified recycled water treatment process. So this is a highly advanced process that uses ultrafiltration, reverse osmosis, UV disinfection, and chlorination to really get an incredibly high quality product at the end of that. That product is then introduced back into a reservoir, so generally a dam or some other storage basin, sometimes underneath the ground in different parts of Australia, where it's mixed with other sources of rainwater or surface water before it's then pulled out from there, treated at a water treatment plant to drinking water standards, and provided to a customer. So this is an incredibly good solution to being able to meet some of the water security issues that are coming out and that are particularly compounded by the impacts of climate change. It also provides a really good benefit in that it really takes up quite a large amount of wastewater, and it allows that to be reused as opposed to being put back into our river systems where it has an impact. So the journey for purified recycled water is progressing in New South Wales. So at the moment, we don't have any existing purified recycled water schemes where that water is actually used for drinking water supply. None of that's in operation as of yet, but we have noted in our Greater Sydney Water Strategy and our Lower Hunter Water Security Plan that there is a really good opportunity here. In 2023, Sydney Water opened a demonstration plant at Quakers Hill, and that's a specific plant that collects and treats wastewater and treats that to a purified recycled water standard. So as I said, it's not being used for drinking water yet. Right now, that water is just used for non-drinking purposes, but the intent over the longer term is that that water will be moved into the Prospect reservoir, eventually treated and moved in through the system. So we're working through a very comprehensive program of community engagement with the hopes that all going well, this could be introduced into the network in the mid-2030s. In order to support the delivery of purified recycled water, there is a real need for good engagement with the community. There have been examples in Australia in the past where this has been done poorly, and we really don't want to make those mistakes. We don't want those mistakes to happen again. As I said, this is an incredible opportunity for water security, and it's one that we want to do really well. Our understanding is that it might take a good 10 years before you can really engage properly on this and bring the community along the journey. What we have done is developed up a framework within New South Wales government to try to put a little bit of rigor around what community engagement specifically on this topic looks like. And the framework has a few different purposes. So it's to support us in understanding what a good engagement program looks like and to kind of evaluate whether or not it's robust and appropriate. It's to evaluate if a good method has been applied. And it's also to set some expectations about what evidence looks like to show not only have we delivered a program, but we've delivered that program really well, and it's deriving the right outcomes in terms of acceptance and a willingness to support purified recycled water. We base the framework on a number of global and Australian examples. We've had it reviewed by some social research experts, and we've recently used it against an evaluation of the Greater Sydney program to give us a bit of a sense of how it plays out and where we need to move to next, so that we can refine that framework and use it a bit more broadly. The framework has a few key components to it. So overall, there is an expectation that there's a community engagement plan specific to any purified recycled water project, and that's developed and reviewed regularly. As I said, this can be a 10-year process, so it's really important that there's an ongoing loop where you're looking at whether or not your engagement is working and whether or not you need to adapt it over time. It's then got 4 kind of key elements in the middle. So one is that the barriers and enablers are identified and addressed. So this is about understanding what are the issues that people have with this particular type of water. Are they comfortable with, or what are the things that what are the reasons they might support it versus what are the things that might make them uncomfortable? And have you embedded your understanding and your feedback around that into your engagement process? The next is about the information that is provided. So this is about making sure that you're transparent about what it is that you're doing, that people can understand the project and the timeline, that they understand the technology, that information is presented in multiple mechanisms, that it's available in multiple languages, and that there's always an opportunity for people to ask questions as needed. The next one is really more of a risk management one, and this is about addressing any sort of opposition. So we know that not everyone will support purified recycled water, and it can make some people uncomfortable. Given that, we don't necessarily think that needs to derail an entire project. What we need to understand is that there's mechanisms in place to keep an eye on that opposition and make sure it doesn't become organized or that it doesn't start to impact the project or your broader community. And then this last middle box is around evidence of community willingness. And this is trying to get around that there's a process of providing information outward, but there's also a need to really bring information inward about what is your community's sentiment, what is their willingness, and are they potentially accepting? So this is about having some really detailed conversations with people about what it is that you're doing so that they understand the technical process, they understand the timeline, they understand the source of that water and when it will be delivered, and that you can demonstrate that there is a willingness to accept that when they're given all of the details and information. All in all, this framework needs to be supported, and the delivery of any project really needs to be supported by a water literate community. So there needs to be a program of really building literacy so people understand where their water comes from now. They understand the relationship between water management and wastewater management, and they're able to make informed decisions when you're asking them questions about future water supply. the other thing is that we need to make sure that there's overall trust and confidence in water safety. So fundamentally, we need people to understand that as a utility and as a regulator, there are so many checks and balances in place to make sure that water safety is paramount and that water safety will be adhered to no matter what the source water is. But it's really important that the community has that trust and confidence in both utilities and regulators. So that sums up my presentation and kind of gives you a sense of where we are on our journey of recycled water and purified recycled water. So happy to take any questions when we finish up in the Q&A. Thank you again for having me.
Erin, that was fantastic. Thank you. My mind is racing with at least 50 questions. So I'm going to hold back on mine and let the audience put theirs in the chat. Please, just a reminder, if you do have any questions at all, pop them in the chat. We will get to them at the end of our overall presentation. But thank you, Erin. That was fascinating, really interesting, and I'm sure for many people in the room, really interesting to hear of some of the similarities and some of the differences between the New South Wales context and here in Victoria. So very much appreciated. Our next speaker is Emma James. Emma is an industrial chemist by trade, but currently works for Sydney Water as a water-sensitive urban designer. Emma has worked in the water industry for about 25 years and has an ongoing interest in water reuse, as of course a water-sensitive urban designer would do. So her role in Sydney Water includes using nature-based solutions to improve effluent management and looking at better ways to manage stormwater. So I guess that real IWM kind of lens. Emma's going to focus today on a particular project at the Picton Water Resource Recovery Facility that treats wastewater from 5 nearby villages with about 20,000 people. And it has a real ecological and recreational value kind of lens. So how can we utilise recycled water for those values and those outcomes? I'm not going to steal any more of Emma's thunder, but absolute pleasure to have you in the room with us. Thank you, Emma.
Excellent. Can you hear me okay and see that screen all right?
Loud and clear and perfectly.
Great. All right. I'll just get that full screen. Thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to you about the work that we've been doing in Picton. And just on the back of that screenshot there, you can see a special wastewater treatment trial that we've been doing using algal raceways, so using algae to treat wastewater and also using wetlands to treat wastewater. So we've got floating wetlands and also surface flow wetlands. I'm happy to talk more about them if that's of interest. But I'll fly through generally the effluent management context and I hope aspects of it are of interest to you down in your beautiful part of the world. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where those projects are happening, which is the Dharawal and Gundungurra people up this way. And they've looked after this land for a long time, and it is so beautiful, this part of the world. Beautiful sandstone gorge that you can see here, the Nepean River, and Stone Quarry Creek is the little tributary that we're trying to protect that is just off to the left-hand side in this image, and equally part of almost like a canyon, a narrow sandstone gorge with beautiful vegetation around it. Koalas off to the right, platypus in the river, eel-tailed catfish, eagles, all sorts of stuff. So beautiful things that are worth protecting. And that's the point of our efforts to improve water management. In particular, there's a little dragonfly, Sydney hawk dragonfly. It's only found in a very limited number of locations, including just here. In another area where it was known, when they removed a weir, it changed the way the water was moving through that area, and now the species is no longer found in that location. So we're really trying to understand, can we manage our water infrastructure and our waterways and the way we put pressures on those waterways to ensure that we can protect ecological species and the values that we like about waterways for recreation and for other uses as well. So 25 years ago, these waters were known to be highly valued ecologically, and they had a special protection sort of class, which meant when Sydney Water was asked to provide a sewer system for this area, there were particular constraints on the way that we could service, and they asked Sydney Water to buy a farm and to irrigate the wastewater rather than just discharge it to the waterways in the way that we do elsewhere. So the EPL, the Environmental Protection Licence from the New South Wales EPA, required us only to discharge in wet weather. Basically, when the creek flow in Stone Quarry Creek was sufficiently high, we would be able to discharge a small proportion of water relative to those creek flows. And that worked well for at least 10 or nearly 15 years. But then after that, more and more villages were being connected up to the scheme. More and more inflow of wastewater was coming into the treatment plant, and those rules were insufficient. We tried to expand the irrigation area. So we went from 90 hectares where we irrigate the water to 120 hectares, and tried to get off-site reuse as well to supply the nearby areas. But we've been unsuccessful in getting that supply beyond the site for a range of reasons that Erin mentioned already around recognising the value of recycled water, having people be able to understand and be accepting of the value of that water, and in evaluating scheme options compared to other things, and importantly, land use planning sort of aspects as well. So basically, we've spent a lot of time trying to understand how to improve effluent management. And we've worked with a range of experts across a range of areas. One of them, Dr. Peter Breen, who's also Victorian, with the CRC for Water Sensitive Cities, as well as some consultancies and other organisations. And he really helped to synthesise the framework that we should be thinking about in terms of each component of effluent management and the sequencing of that. So you really want to reduce inflows at the very start, try to reduce the volume that you're dealing with. And this should be relevant for industrial waters as well as wastewater management in a range of contexts. So I'll talk about that briefly, including the way that communities have a role in that. Then increasing reuse, which is obviously of interest to everyone. And I think we've got a few things that we've learned along that journey. And then once you've reused as much water as you can, it then allows you to focus your investment on treatment for the remaining volume. And I think that's a really important context, that if you can reuse that water cost effectively, then you reduce the need for costly energy intensive treatment that would, further downstream. And then finally, minimise the impact of our discharges on waterways. So that's the key bits that I'll talk through now, and I welcome any questions on any aspects of this, and there's a lot more that I can go into detail on if any aspect is of more interest. So briefly on inflows, this is a bit like the energy efficiency argument. Turning off the lights a whole lot cheaper than building an energy system to supply unlimited amount of lighting. So reducing water consumption where it's an easy thing to do is always the most cost effective opportunity. So a community role in water efficiency is really important, including lot scale reuse, where you can replace irrigation around a home with grey water or harvested stormwater, rainwater tanks, those sorts of things, to reduce the amount of drinking water that's being brought into the area, and the amount of wastewater that's related to the whole servicing of an area. Sydney Water or other water utilities have a role in water conservation as well. So they can provide subsidies and all sorts of initiatives that have a recognised benefit for water conservation. And that's a really important economic assessment way of making sure that we're making the right investments ahead of a drought rather than running into a drought and suddenly realising that we needed these sorts of measures well in advance of those conditions. Equally, there's efficiency and reuse that we should think about to make sure we're getting the maximum benefit without high cost infrastructure. And that's often about smoothing out how much water we need at peak times, which is often at the end of the day on a hot day when people think, oh, I'd better irrigate the garden. So there's a lot of efficiencies that we could have there, and particularly in partnerships with communities. Wet weather is a really difficult issue, and it leaves the treatment plant at the end of the pipe with really high cost solutions that are not optimal. So I think we can do better in the catchment, and I think there's a lot of ways we can think about those sort of water sensitive urban design and integrated water management options. Resilience is an amazing concept that we need to get a whole lot better at, and there's a nice link there if you're interested in that sort of space. And Sydney Water's got some amazing scientists who've been looking at the impact of wastewater overflows on waterways. So again, that science, a decade of research, is available to people and relevant more broadly. And sewer mining also reduces inflows further downstream, and there'll be great opportunities for resource recovery and getting value from the water, the nutrients, and the opportunities to transfer that into energy or ways to use those resources if we become smarter in that sort of resource recovery and circular economy thinking. And then on increasing reuse, it remains challenging at Picton, but we've got a few things in our favour. The whole model of wastewater servicing, been recognising that the recycled water is a least cost mechanism to provide wastewater services. So that's a fundamental way that means we can get funding. The costs of servicing the homes to manage their wastewater can be used to provide recycled water infrastructure. And so that helps to provide sufficient investment to get these types of outcomes. I think it's really important that we think about lower cost models to do that. So maybe we don't need to purchase land the way Sydney Water did 25 years ago in purchasing land. Now we might see if we can partner with people to do that. But it really needs those collaborations from a circular economy perspective. And we need the markets that recognise an economic value from the resources, the nutrients, the ways to grow food and to produce energy and have biomass and other things that have value if our economics recognise it. We're looking at smart irrigation, so trying to understand when we are irrigating, how can we optimise the amount of water that's being used? If we're using drinking water, that might be to minimise the amount of water that's being used. But with effluent management, we're actually trying to maximise the amount of water that can be used safely without having runoff and without damaging the soils. And that way we know that we're minimising the water that's remaining to be treated to a higher standard and discharged to waterways. So we've got some exciting things in that space with satellite imagery that can detect how healthy the plants are and whether there's a deficit in irrigation over time, as well as using some irrigation scheduling software that draws in information and helps us forecast how much more water or what's the right amount of water to be irrigating over a certain period. And again, we need to understand is, how can these be low cost ways for effluent management? There's opportunities, I think, around hydration. So we're learning more and more about how we can have better water, soil, and vegetation optimization, and that also links to the flow in waterways. So if a catchment is hydrated, then there'll be a flow to the waterways that reflects that hydrated soil landscape. And we think at the moment that a lot of soils are dehydrated in a sense. So we need to start to understand what's the way to have more optimal management of hydration in a catchment and more natural hydrology in waterways. And I think there's a lot that we can do in that front. There may even be bushfire risk mitigation benefits where we have targeted areas for hydration, almost like wetland zones or hydration zones that we deliberately plan in our landscapes in appropriate locations. And finally, we're thinking about off-site reuse. Greg Ingleton, who's working in the same team as me at Sydney Water, has come up with a concept of taking more recycled water than is generated in wastewater being provided to a treatment plant. So we're trying to link the land use planning for servicing a new development who wants to send a lot of wastewater to a treatment plant that's constrained, and saying that could occur if we can find a commercial model for more recycled water to be reused. So that's an interesting and innovative model that we're looking to explore. And the next one, around improving treatment, we're really focusing on reducing bioavailable nutrients. So these are the things that really stimulate an ecosystem response in waterways. So we looked at wetland trials, and excitingly, a new technology using macroalgae with a company called Regen Aqua. So it's a filamentous green algae that polishes the secondary treated wastewater. And that means that we're able to get clean water to be released to the waterways, and beneficial reuse of the nutrients, also removing other contaminants in the water, water like metals and other parameters. And then we're getting carbon being sequestrated as the algae grows. It's taking carbon out of the atmosphere and out of the water. So you're creating this large amount of biomass that holds those nutrients and other material and other contaminants. And so then that can be used beneficially as a fertilizer, a biostimulant, biofuels, bioplastics, and even fodder. And we think that that's a really exciting pathway to be considering. And there's, as always, the comparison with other technologies, which is difficult but necessary. And finally, the aspect of understanding how to mitigate impacts on waterways. We've adopted the Australian and New Zealand guidelines for fresh and marine water quality, which has a water quality management framework to help us understand what we need to monitor and how we can have a monitoring plan to help us understand what impacts we're having and how to minimise them. So the discharge regime is a complex puzzle, but we're looking at how we can optimise that discharge regime, and then understanding what concentrations are important for us to monitor in the waterway. So toxicants that have known impacts on waterways, on little biota in the waterways. We want to make sure that we are below those concentrations and that we understand any upstream concentrations that might be impacted by other pressures in the catchment. So even stormwater runoff, industrial uses, mining impacts, all of those things can result in toxicant levels of concern. So it's really important that we start to monitor these better and understand how well protected our waterways are and what we can do to minimise the proportion of time that waterways are experiencing conditions of concern. And finally, looking at whether or not waterway health is protected. We've been using macroinvertebrates in Sydney for a long time with a lot of expertise of monitoring how healthy our waterways are by looking at these diverse community of macroinvertebrates. We've also at Picton started to look at diatoms. So it's another type of growth in the waterways that can give us an indication of whether there's nutrient-rich conditions that might be of concern. And we're hoping that we can compare upstream and downstream and demonstrate that we are not having an impact on these waterways. And ecotoxicity testing is again an important way of understanding the whole complexity of the water that we're analysing and what potential impact it might have. And important species like the dragonfly that I mentioned at the start, and fish and platypus and other animals in the environment that we can protect. So we're trying to make sure we've got that holistic perspective through effluent management. So I'll finish just with a slide that shows how that all comes together and highlight that reuse is a really fundamental component to make sure that we can minimise these impacts on the waterway and all the different aspects that we're looking at there. Happy to take any questions on that at the later session.
Emma, that's fascinating. It's such a rich example of, I guess, the real tangible application, like all of these conceptual issues that are covered in policy and all that sort of stuff. You're really tackling with, trialing a whole bunch of different options and solutions and pathways, and I think it's just a super rich example of really wrestling with this stuff on a in an on ground and particularly from that ecological perspective. So again, I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions for you at the end. So thank you so much for joining us in that fascinating presentation. It's now my pleasure to introduce our last speaker, Peter Morgan, who is potentially familiar to some of you from your time around the traps in the Barwon catchment. Peter is the head of asset planning with Barwon Water, where he's responsible for long-term planning to meet the water and sewage needs of the rapidly growing region. No big deal. He holds a Bachelor of Engineering and a Master of Engineering Science, both from Melbourne Uni. Peter has over 15 plus 20 years of professional experience in the water sector. I just refuse to believe he could have been in there for 35 years. He looks too young, so an incredibly experienced operator in the water sector, and has worked in both private and public sectors, and has really been instrumental in a number of innovative integrated water management opportunities, including the Northern Water Plant that supplies high quality recycled water to the Geelong refinery, and the alternative water grid for the Geelong region, which is a really big, large scale project that will have significant impacts for our region. So without further ado, Peter, my great pleasure to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Trent, and welcome everyone. And yeah, I've been really enjoying the last two presentations as well. So today I'm going to give you a few examples of water recycling in our region, as well as some integrated water management initiatives that we're pursuing. But before I get into those examples, I just wanted to give you a bit of background as to why Barwon Water sees it really important that we focus on recycled water and integrated water management. Barwon Water has a strategy 2030 where, and this diagram outlines that strategy on a page. Over the top of the page is the four key outcome areas that we strive to deliver to our customers. So the first one is safe, secure, sustainable water. Second one, innovative, reliable services, healthier environment, and trust, value, and affordability. And there are some focus areas or aspirations under each of those outcome areas that we are really trying to strive to do to achieve those outcomes. So, and a number of those really direct us towards considering recycling water and integrated water management. So under safe, secure, sustainable water, we're aspiring to climate resilient water, water smart growth and water efficient systems. And under healthier environment, we aspire to have zero waste and healthier flows in our rivers. The other significant factor in our region is that we're growing. We're one of the fastest growing regions in Australia. The population could reach 500,000 in our region within the next 15 years. So with increased population, there is increased demand for water. The other thing is that we also forecasting reduced availability of water from our traditional water sources, river water sources, such as the Barwon River. So the forecast using climate models is that will decline going forward. And this diagram sort of represents the increase in water demand due to population growth in our region, and the gradual decline in our traditional supply systems from river water going forward due to climate change. So if we do nothing, we're potentially short of about 50,000 million litres per year of water by 2070 in 50 years' time. So we do need to think about what we do to meet that challenge. Back in 2022, we developed our future strategy for our region. It sets out how we propose to move forward and meet those challenges. It was developed with some extensive engagement with our customers and communities in the region, including a deliberative panel. So this slide's sort of setting out at a high level the key actions in the short term, in the next 5 years, and also over the next 50 years. So in the next 5 years, we're focusing on what we can do around better use of the water that we have, a sustainable water use program, and we're targeting savings of about 1,000 megalitres per year with that program. We're also investing in smarter ways of doing things. So expanding use of smart technologies such as digital meters and so on that help us to better identify losses in our system, respond faster to leaks and so on, to also save water. And we're looking at how we plan and service key growth areas in our region as well, to do that in a smarter way that reduces the increase in demand for drinking water. And on the supply side, we're in the short term increasing our ability to move water from the Melbourne system through a pipeline that we have that connects Melbourne and Geelong, and we're targeting an increase of 1,000 megalitres per year of increased use of recycled water for productive use. So that's the short term. But over the 50-year period where we've got that really large challenge, our strategy is to gradually reduce our reliance on rivers and groundwater and transition to more climate resilient manufactured water sources, such as recycled water, stormwater, desalinated seawater. Some of you might have seen the release of the state government's water security plan a week or so ago. It's very much aligned to our long-term strategy. So that is sort of flagging the exploration of some large-scale water resource options going forward, and that includes that same range of options: desalination capacity increases, use of purified recycled water over that 50-year planning horizon, greater use of stormwater, some significant water efficiency initiatives, and some large-scale integrated water management initiatives. So those options are going to be explored in the coming year or so by the government, and hopefully we'll then have a clearer pathway over that 50 years to meet the growing needs for Melbourne and for the Greater Geelong region. So one of the focused areas in the next 5 years was around integrated water management for the key growth areas of Geelong. And on this slide on the right-hand side is a map of Geelong, and the two large future growth areas are called the Northern Geelong Growth Area and the Western Geelong Growth Area. Ultimately, they'll house about 110,000 people, so about the size of Ballarat as it currently is. So really significant growth area. So that presents a challenge, but it also presents us with big opportunities at the planning phase to do some really smart thinking about how we service that and provide efficient and livable communities. So a couple of years ago, we collaborated with the City of Greater Geelong, some of the key developers in these growth areas, parts of the state government at DECA, to develop an integrated water management plan. And some of the key outcomes from that plan are the provision of recycled water throughout the growth areas for residential use as well as local industry use, and for keeping landscapes green and livable. It also had a number of recommendations and actions around ensuring that the rain that falls on the urban landscape is slowed down and retained in the landscape to try and sustain a green and livable and cooler urban environment. And also at the same time reduce some of the impacts of the sort of flash stormwater runoff that you get from urban areas as well. The work that we did on this integrated water management plan also highlighted an even larger opportunity around a large-scale alternative water grid. So this slide, it shows the two future growth areas in the north of Geelong, shaded sort of a reddy, pinky colour there. For us to be able to cater for those growth areas from a sewage perspective in a traditional way, we would need to upgrade all the sewers through the middle of Geelong and all the way down to the coast at Black Rock, near in between Torquay and Bowen Heads. And the cost of that would be significant. It would be very, very disruptive. So that sort of sparked us to say, well, what if we instead of doing that, took the sewage closer to where it's been produced in the north and treat it to a high quality, and then instead of building a sewage pipeline all the way down to the coast, build a recycled water pipeline that then can be used to connect all our sources of treated water or recycled water, so that we can then distribute that water to locations where there are demands for the water. So instead of investing in sewage infrastructure, we're investing in recycled water infrastructure to cater for that growth. And this map also shows some of the key future and existing employment precincts. So it will provide a means for us to move good quality recycled water to large water using industries for use, and reduce the potential for those industries to use drinking water for their purposes. And there's a number of potential agricultural areas along the route of that pipeline as well, where we could support economic activities in agriculture and horticulture. Yeah, and if you look at the bottom of this diagram, you can see that there's a stormwater harvesting highlighted just near Torquay, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. So we're calling this an alternative water grid or a sustainable water network. And the reason for that is it's not only looking at, collecting and distributing recycled water for uses, but there's also the opportunity to add stormwater into that network as another water resource to meet the growing water needs of the region. So this is a sort of a blown up version of that stormwater harvesting proposal near Torquay. This idea was really generated due to impacts of stormwater on a saltwater marsh to the west of Torquay called the Carafe wetland. The urbanisation of Torquay has meant that there's been an increase in flow of fresh water into that salt marsh, and it's having an impact on the environment there. So that's one of the drivers for doing something with the stormwater. And the other is that there are demands for water in the Surf Coast hinterland for horticulture and agricultural uses. And so we may be able to meet the two needs with the one solution. So we've been collaborating with Surf Coast Shire Council and with the government, and the federal government has given us some funding for this as well, to implement a stormwater harvesting system that then reduces the volume of fresh water going into the wetland and provides water for economic use in the Surf Coast hinterland. And there's a subsequent stage shown in green there that, should demand increase in the Surf Coast hinterland for water, that we've got an ability to expand the supply of recycled water for those activities. Just a few other examples that we're working on. So this is one on the Ballarat Peninsula at Port Arlington. This is a picture of our Port Arlington water reclamation plant. So this water reclamation plant currently supplies recycled water to a number of vineyards and other horticultural activities, and to the Port Arlington Golf Club. There's a number of challenges with that, and some of the vineyards actually use a bit of drinking water to reduce the salinity of the water, because it's causing some impacts on the soil. And they're also reluctant to expand their operations because of the quality of the recycled water. So this project's investing in a salt reduction facility at the end of this treatment process, to bring the salinity of the recycled water back to something that is more suitable for the uses, the economic uses on the Ballarat Peninsula. And we've already had some of the farmers there progressing with their investment in additional vineyards, for instance, on the back of us committing to reduce the salinity of the wastewater. This is another example where we've done the detailed design about to construct the delivery of Class A recycled water to the Warn Ponds Deakin campus, where they're currently using drinking water for their sports fields and other grounds amenity use. So yeah, we're building a recycled water pipeline to that campus. It'll potentially save 100 megalitres per year of drinking water use by instead substituting it with Class A recycled water. And one that was completed just last year was a recycled water system for the Apollo Bay Golf Club. So they previously used drinking water for watering their greens and tees, and we have invested in a recycled water system. This one's a Class B system, so there's a few extra controls with how that water can be used, but that reduces the drinking water demand in Apollo Bay by about 10 megalitres per year, which is very significant for Apollo Bay, which is very water constrained in dry years. One more on a household scale is Hydroloop, which is a advanced grey water recycling technology. We're collaborating with some of the other water corporations in Melbourne to undertake a trial of Hydroloop. We've purchased, I think there are 7 units of different sizes, and we're just testing the efficiency of these in reducing drinking water demand. So it takes water from showers and basins and enables that water to be treated and used for toilet flushing, garden watering, and in washing machines. So one of the units we've set up at the Gordon TAFE, and it's been used for training of trades students there. We also set up one unit at a Surf Coast Caravan Park at Torquay in an amenities block there to test its operation. What we're really interested in is not only understanding savings that this might achieve on the drinking water side, but also the cost of initial installation, the ongoing cost of operation and maintenance of the unit, and that will then help us to understand the potential for these types of household or end-use type recycling systems to be applied more broadly. I think Sydney Water's also doing a trial, so yeah, it's certainly an interesting technology that we're wanting to make sure that we are taking advantage of and that we fully understand. And the last one is a project that was implemented some time ago that Trent mentioned. It's the Northern Water Plant. It was constructed beside the Geelong refinery. It provides a very high quality of recycled water to the refinery for use in its boilers. And it also supplies a different recycled water quality across the road to Stead Park sporting facilities. So there's soccer pitches and hockey fields and so on for watering that in the northern part of Geelong. It's quite interesting that this is a really advanced water recycling facility. The water that's produced for the refinery is actually a better quality than the drinking water that they previously used. The mineral content is virtually zero, so it's much better for their boilers. There's reduced scaling in their boilers, so they would prefer to use the water from this Northern Water Plant than the drinking water from our reticulated water supply because of the lower mineral content in the water. It also is a case of integrated water management, this investment. So it helped to address a downstream sewage problem from a capacity perspective, and it also helped address a problem that we had from an odour and odour emission perspective in the downstream system. It was a joint project with the refinery. They invested significantly in the project, and it's certainly been very successful for us, an example of what can be achieved. It saved about 5% of the drinking water supply of the region when it was first implemented. So that's all I've got to present today. I think I've gone a couple of minutes over time, so I hope that leaves enough time for questions. Back to you, Trent.
Thank you so much, Peter. Now, anyone, I'm just going to flash this up. Please jump onto that QR code for those who are in the room, or bring it up now on your phone, and you can get to it a bit later if you prefer to stay zeroed in and listening to the conversation. But if you can grab a phone, scan that QR code, and then come back to it when we log off, just to give us some feedback about the webinar today and what you might like to hear about in the future, and any ways we can improve this for future work that the Friends of the Barwon do. I want to share my sincere thanks with our three presenters, Erin, Emma, and Peter. There are some questions coming through in the chat, although I suspect potentially I've got a sneaking suspicion not everyone's able to access the chat. Is that possibly true? Because I given the number of things firing in my brain, I'm surprised that the chat's been so quiet. I'm going to take facilitator prerogative though, and throw a first question out. This is sort of a joint one for Erin and for Peter. And I guess I was just thinking, Peter, your presentation really did focus around the use of recycled water for industry, for irrigation, agriculture, that sort of thing, rather than for potable. I was wondering how much that is because our water storages are a lot further away generally than, from where that recycled water might be produced. And is that a factor in that, or is it more about the policy settings? And similarly, Emma, is it potentially because those water catchments are quite close to, or some of the ones around Sydney in particular, and the Central Coast, for example, are quite close to where some of those treatment plants might be, so that they can, you can shandy. I guess. I think my sense is the direction that we're heading for any, recycled to potable is that it would be, shandied with rainwater or catchment water. And so I'm wondering if that's sort of a policy setting question, or if that's more about the kind of, the geography and the locations that we're working with.
I'm happy to start there. So I think, purified recycled water is definitely an option that is being considered as part of the water security plan for the long-term planning horizon. So I encourage people to have a look at that. And that water security plan is for Melbourne Geelong connected system. So be considering all options. So there's no option off the table as far as that I understand for that piece of work. There is a time period, and I think that was explained really well in the presentation, that it's the engagement around purified recycled water is absolutely critical, and that sort of 10-year time frame for starting to have that conversation with the community and is critical for being successful in getting something implemented. And it sounds like in New South Wales, they've got a really clear plan to start to navigate through that, which it's fantastic. I know we've been watching that very closely, it's really good news that we're starting to have these conversations, and that we're being serious about considering what technically is a possible solution. In terms of why we're not doing it in our region, I think it's different in cost of different use of the recycled water. So the case with the Northern Water Plant, we're treating it to a really, really high quality, similar to what you would do for purified recycled water, except with purified recycled water, you probably add in some of the, you make it potable again. So you take out all the minerals and everything from the water using the treatment process, then you have to add something back so that it's actually healthy for people to drink, because you do actually need some minerals in the water for it to be drinkable. But it costs extra to produce the higher quality. So if we can use the water usefully, sustainably, productively, without having to use those high energy, high cost processes, then the opportunity is there to do that. And that's what we're trying to do with the large scale alternative water grid. So there's uses that you can put that water to that you don't need to use those really expensive technologies for. Yep.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Peter. Erin, any thoughts?
Yeah, there's not much more to add. I think probably just to say that, purified recycled water is not the best solution everywhere, but it makes reasonable sense in some places. So where we've been looking at it for both Sydney and the Lower Hunter, there is a significant risk to water supply for drought. And so providing a more resilient supply that is rainfall independent is a kind of the key focus of what we need to do to improve water security for those systems. So then your options become narrowed. So you start to look at recycling, or you start to look at desalination. Desalination is still a good option, and probably comparatively similar price. It just depends on if there's some extra added benefits that you might get from a purified recycled water perspective. And in Sydney, that's certainly the case. So if you're able to avoid investment in significant amount of wastewater treatment, you get that extra benefit as well. So there's different drivers based on location. And as you said, some of those are geographical. So is your infrastructure located properly? And some of it is in what other treatment you need to do in order to get that water up to a certain standard, or what you need to do to manage your wastewater discharges. So it is case by case specific where it makes the most sense. But for obviously places that don't have access to desalination need to start really thinking about what the role of purified recycled water for drinking might be if you do want to move to a more rainfall independent supply.
Yeah, that's a fantastic fantastic example, or a fantastic point to remind us of. Thanks, Erin. I think what immediately then comes to mind is about the issues with smoothing costs for all customers across those different systems that might cost a different amount, but obviously that's a whole other conversation. I did just want to thank you very much, Erin and Emma, for answering some of the questions that have already been posed. You've provided amazing answers to those questions in the chat. I'm not going to re-prosecute those because you've done a fantastic job of covering them. I did want to pick up one other thing that kind of was a very common thread through all of your discussions was the the critical importance of community support for this, the critical importance of engagement, of building a more literate water literate community, including a more climate literate community, I guess, to understand the pressures and why those things are, being explored at this point in time. I was really interested, Emma, if in your research of those alternative treatments, the wetland systems, the algal races, etc., is there a different perception of recycled water that has been through a kind of nature-based solution versus something that has been otherwise chemically treated? Has that been an element that you've looked at to date?
No, it hasn't been a focus. I think there's a really important role for communities. We talk in the water sensitive urban design space about water sensitive communities being a really fundamental pillar. People have to be engaged and be active in the choices they make that influence the water cycle at all levels. And that becomes really important when we're talking about these complex things like PRW and acceptance of recycled water, being used on sport fields or golf courses or anything like that. We all need to understand what's involved. But the treatment systems that sit upstream of an irrigation on a golf course, they still need to meet the guidelines. So there's the Australian guidelines for water recycling. And that tells you must make sure you've reduced these pathogens to this level to ensure that it's safe. And so if you have a wetland or a algal raceway, even if it provides a level of reduction, you'll likely still have further filtration and further disinfection because we have UV systems and chlorination, and both of those things and filtration, those things are very good at removing particular pathogens and elements of concern. But the big thing they can do is those wetlands and algal raceways can really reduce the energy intensity of what we're doing. And I'm hoping that they can be better integrated into our landscapes. So instead of needing to have a fence around a treatment plant, the landscape could be part of your treatment system. And that means that the investment is not all locked up behind a fence, but the investment is in our communities. And then you've got a beautiful precinct with beautiful green spaces that are also functionally improving water treatment. And that would be excellent.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the kind of design work that Peter was talking about that has happened in those initial kind of planning phases for those growth areas as well.
Absolutely.
There is a very specific question in the chat for Peter around data centres and planning for data centres as potential users. I'm wondering though, Emma and Erin as well, from your perspectives in New South Wales, if there's been any conversations around the extreme sort of water use demands of those data centres and whether there have been sort of specific conversations between, say, the planning or the parts of government that are planning for those kind of industry growth opportunities and the water sector. I'm gonna throw to Peter first whether those conversations have happened in Victoria, because that was the specific question from Mary, but I think it'd be fascinating to know if that's happened in New South Wales as well.
Yeah, there certainly is a very strong focus area for water corporations in Victoria, particularly in Melbourne, where most of the data centres proposals seem to be coming. it is a really challenging area because there's such a vast difference in water use from the different proponents. Some they use virtually no water, and others use huge amounts of water. So there's an energy water nexus here. So the ones that use less energy tend to use more water, and the ones that use more water use less energy. So there's a lot of work happening in the policy space around how we deal with this going forward from a Victorian perspective. Won't necessarily be driven from an individual water corporation like Barwon Water. We're certainly participating in discussions, and we need to make sure that we input and contribute to that discussion. We certainly we wouldn't be looking to provide drinking water to a data centre in our region because of our drinking water constraints that we have, and for the really large scale, sort of hyper scale data centres, it would place our existing customers at a water security risk if we provided the water right now to those. In time, we might have capacity for it, but not right now. So we would tend to direct them towards recycled water as an opportunity. And look at, and obviously there's the funding for that would need to be contributed by the proponents. So, but most of the proposals are within Melbourne, so not necessarily in Geelong. Yeah.
I think probably the nub of the question is, are there other sort of parts of the state government that are involved in planning where these kind of that infrastructure might go? Talking to the water corps, and it sounds like they certainly are. Yeah. Emma, you were going to jump in?
Yeah, no, it's certainly an interesting challenge, and I think there is the concern about the water demand and about the energy demand, and we need to make sure that the opportunity of the investment is helping us to step towards more sustainable energy supply systems and water supply systems. There is definitely opportunities for better water management. So whether it's a wastewater network that's constrained, a recycled water system that could be established, a stormwater management project that could be supported, I think there is a lot of opportunities. And if that investment can take a step towards getting better management, then it's an opportunity as well as a thing that we need to carefully manage. And I think that choice of making sure that it's not a drinking water investment, as they are at the moment. So, that's the understanding at the moment, is that they're largely being supplied by drinking water. So we really do need that government level and water utility collaboration and community interest to ensure that we take this step towards something more sustainable and attract the investment that would otherwise go elsewhere to our opportunity to provide that good infrastructure here and provide the social license for people to want to use that service and know that under the governance that we're able to provide, it's actually facilitating an improvement in outcomes.
Absolutely. That's great perspective. Erin.
Yeah, so in New South Wales, we are looking at some these broader policy issues around data centers. So the water part, the infrastructure investment part, the New South Wales government, and the energy part, as well as Sydney Water, are all really thinking through, well, what needs to be done in the short term in terms of how do we garner the planning approval process to make sure that we're doing this in a really considered way. So looking at clusters where these may be, looking where we can centralize recycled water solutions so that those are providing a centralized point to cluster the data centers and making best use of infrastructure. And then on the longer term as well, really thinking about how do we do this sustainably. So like Emma said, setting a precedent for what types of water sources are required, but also thinking about the efficiency levers as well. So, there is this nexus of water versus energy, but do we need to make sure that we're requiring minimum levels for these kind of large water users in terms of their levels of efficiency, and having some understanding of how that might change over time as these technologies might become more and more efficient, but also greater in scale.
Yeah,
it's definitely a massive challenge and a really hot topic. So yeah, be interesting to see where it goes. And I guess in New South Wales as well, the clusters really tend to be in Sydney, the same as in Victoria, where they're in Melbourne. There's talk of a few others, but mostly they seem to be quite in the major cities.
Fabulous. Okay. Last question, which has somewhat been covered in the chat, but I think I'd love a little bit more discussion on it if we can, where we are, and I think Peter's example of the alternative water network is a fantastic one, where that combination of, and I think Emma, you mentioned it in your preso as well, about that combination of stormwater and recycled water and potable water, and the kind of the mix of those things is the I guess the jurisdictional responsibility getting in the way of those opportunities being realised in a more holistic way. You know, the different responsibilities between, say, councils for stormwater and water corps for recycled and potable, and then in our case the CMA as the waterway, you know, manager with that environmental lens, or is that, you know, being navigated effectively? Would there be benefit in? I loved the idea of the triage. Not the triage service, the concierge service, Erin, which I think is fantastic. It's obviously showing that leadership from DQ in terms of, you know, linking up the right parties, but obviously there are still different responsibilities in that space between different agencies. Is it an unnecessary hurdle at the moment that's getting in the way of getting things done? Is it just a complication? Is it actually, you know, not an issue? I think I want to, you know, I don't want to prime the pump one way or the other that it's an issue or it's an opportunity. I guess just your perspective on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's the major issue. I think with integrated water management solutions, there's always multiple stakeholders, and they're challenging because of that and the complexity and understanding the multiple benefits and different beneficiaries and how and who should fund the benefits that are being achieved by the investment. So it's complicated. I think we work together pretty well. So I'm not sure that it's stopping us. It's just making sure that we do the work that's necessary to be able to say, yeah, this is a good community outcome, but that the benefits that the community gets outweigh the cost of the investments, because a lot of these things are really expensive, very, very expensive, and it makes it hard for one of the beneficiaries to pay 100% of it. So yeah, it's a collaboration process which requires people to work together. I'm not sure whether changing jurisdictional boundaries is ever going to be possible to completely put the jurisdiction in one party's court, because I think there will always be multiple parties with some sort of role.
Yeah, great reflection. Thank you. Emma or Erin, do you have any thoughts on that? Emma, do you want to go?
I completely agree with what Peter said then, and I think it comes to the community element as well. You know, we need every player to be part of the solution, and so then it's more about understanding how to get that collaboration, how to get the science that helps inform what targets we need to achieve and why, and then all the cost sharing sort of stuff that needs to happen. So yeah, I think there's a lot that we can do within the frameworks, but acknowledge that fragmentation of management responsibility exists, and deal with it through monitoring and planning and operating effectively together.
Wonderful. Erin, any last thoughts on that?
Yeah, probably just to say, I think that while sometimes the individual solutions kind of come from different agencies, I think fundamentally, if we have good planning policies that say this is where we want to be, this is what we want communities and landscapes and waterways to look like into the future, and we've got some clear targets around that, the delivery agency becomes less critical. So we can all work because everyone's working towards the same outcome. So there's still lots of coordination that needs to be done. But I think that's where we found a little bit more success in New South Wales, is where we've been really clear on this is what we need to reach together, and everybody can do their own little bit, and we figure out an appropriate funding model. But clarity in a target or an outcome is key to moving us together towards that objective.
I think that's a fantastic note to finish on, is all of us kind of agencies, community alike, having a shared vision of what we want our environmental and our social future to look like. And then that helps us work towards it and work through those inevitable challenges that we have. I want to take this opportunity to thank you three presenters and everyone who came along today so very much. I think such a rich discussion. It's such a critical issue that we're all wrestling with. To kind of bookend, I guess, the title of this webinar was Recycled Water Use, Let's Get On With It. I think hearing from Erin and Emma and Peter, it's clear that we are getting on with it, but it is far from a straightforward issue that is going to require a lot of effort, advocacy, innovative thinking, collaboration, and fantastic examples of all of those from our three speakers today. So thank you so much on behalf of Friends of the Barwon and all of the other partners and community. It's fantastic to hear your perspectives from New South Wales, your perspectives from Barwon Water, and just deep appreciation for your time today.
Thank you.
I'll remind everyone as
so
well
much.
that thank you. I'll remind everyone as well that the recording of this webinar will be on the Friends of the Barwon YouTube channel. We would love you to give us some feedback. The Menti feedback link is in the chat. Have an absolutely beautiful rest of your Friday, and I hope your weekend's kind to you, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.